It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by SubashTechnosis.com. Go to SubashTechnosis.com if you need a website designed, you need search engine optimization, any kind of content writing, data entry, press releases. They got a new program going on there. It's called private domain backlinking. And a lot of people, you know the value of backlinking if you want your website to reach number one on Google, and they have their own process, their private domain backlinking. So check it out. If you contact Subash Technosis, make sure you mention Ed Opperman. I've known Subash for 10 years, and that's how you get a good deal. Okay, I'm very excited to have back to our show Douglas Valentine. We had him on a couple of years back. It's been a while. It's been a long time to discuss his book about the Phoenix program. That book is considered probably the Bible of the CIA and the authoritative book on the Phoenix program. There's no doubt about that. So we're very lucky to have Doug come back. I beg him all the time to come back. I got him now. I got him on here. I don't want to waste too much time. The new book is The CIA as Organized Crime: How Illegal Operations Corrupt America and the World. And you could find that at DouglasValentine.com. Mr. Valentine, are you there?
Hi, Ed. Thanks for having me on your show again. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk to your informed audience.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the audience is pretty good. And we have some pretty sharp people out there that are tuned in to all this kind of stuff you're doing.
So fire when ready. If you have some questions for me, throw them at me.
Well, Doug, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Doug Valentine? Remind the audience.
Well, I'm 67, like I was just telling you, complaining about my aches and pains and my hearing loss, and just had a detached retina. So I'm on Social Security now, and but I was brought up in the 50s, 60s. My father worked two jobs. My mother worked. My father was a blue-collar guy. He drove a truck for Railway Express and would work for them for 15 years, and he got laid off. And that was kind of traumatic for the family. I can empathize with blue-collar families that, your father loses a job and the pressure that is on the family, the economic pressure of never knowing where your next check is coming from. In my family, my mother and father never owned a house. We rented a house out in the country, but and they tried their best to give us all the things that that they could, but it was always a struggle for my parents, and that was a big influence on my life, going through those economic hard times. And then my father got a new job with the post office because he'd been a veteran of World War II. And so the post office always gives you some extra points on your application if you were a veteran. There's a lot of veterans in the post office, and I wasn't a particularly happy kid, and when it was time to leave the house, I left, and I didn't really go back. I didn't really get along with my parents. I didn't particularly get along with my father, who was a very conservative kind of a guy. But he worked himself pretty much to death and had his first open heart surgery when he was 45. And had his second open heart surgery when he was 55. And I had never really been particularly close to him, but he called me up after his second open heart surgery. He was having a terrible time in the internal care unit. at the hospital. He was having terrible nightmares. And the hospital had to put him in a room by himself because he was disturbing the other patients. And they sent a psychiatrist in to see him. And the psychiatrist told him that if he ever want to get better, he had to tell everybody what happened to him in the war. And it turned out that he wasn't just working himself to death with the 2 jobs, but had a very, very bad case of PTSD. And for veterans of World War II, it was kind of undignified to complain about your war experiences. It wasn't like with Vietnam, where it became a very public thing. So most World War II veterans had dealt with it simply by internalizing it. And it wasn't all that uncommon for people in my father's generation to have men who'd been in the war and terrible combat and stuff like that to have heart attacks very early, and nobody ever knew what caused it. But he told me on the recommendation of his doctors what happened to him in the war. And I wrote my first book about that. Although I was climbing trees for a living, I was a college dropout, and I worked for a tree company. I was what's called a top climber. You know, a rope and a saddle, and I'd climb up the tree and cut the branches off around houses and stuff like that. And I did that for many years. But I always wanted to be a writer, and he knew that. And after his second open heart surgery, which was in 1980, when he was 55, he called me up and said, "Come on home, I got a story to tell you." And I wrote that first book called The Hotel Talk Lobit, which was about my father's experiences in World War II. And in the process of doing that, he and I became very good friends. We formed a bond that had never been there. And it was him revealing these intimate secrets and weaknesses, you know, the terrible horrors that he had, things that he thought were a sign of weakness, and explaining all those things to him that brought us together and enabled us to have a relationship. But the impetus had to come from him as the father, not me as the son. You can't go ask your parent to tell you all their deepest, darkest secrets and make them do it. They got to want to do it. And he wanted to do it. He did it. And one of the things, and that really was the big event of my life, personally and professionally, because now I had a writing career. And looking around to write a second book, I decided, because I had written a book about World War II, decided to write a book about the Vietnam War. And I went to a veterans hospital, went to the director, and I asked him, well, what's a part of the Vietnam War that's never been written about? And he said, the Phoenix program. And I said, well, what the heck's the Phoenix program? I didn't know anything about it. It was 1984. And he said, well, there's a guy here, a veteran, in the hospital, in the VA hospital, and he was in the Phoenix program, and he's told me a bit about it, and I'll get him to tell you about it. Give me a couple of days. Well, a couple of days went by, and the director of the VA hospital called me up and said, the guy's not going to talk to you. He's afraid that if he talks to you, he'll lose his VA benefits because he'll be revealing CIA secrets. And that really stunned me. I mean, it was like what happened to my father. In the Second World War, it was the same thing, where people were afraid. So veterans are afraid for particular reasons. I'm not talking about their experience. And of course, in the United States, their wives and their children don't know what war is. The United States hasn't had wars fought here. So people are really unaware about what the realities of war are. And unless the veterans tell you, you're never going to know. Well, there was nobody who was a veteran of the Phoenix program that was talking about it. So I was very excited. I was going to write a book about the Phoenix program and break new ground and make my name as a writer and do all sorts of great, wonderful things. And I did a little reading on the Phoenix program, and I found out that there was a guy named William Colby who'd been the head of the CIA, who'd had a lot to do with creating the program and running it in Vietnam. And he was the program's big defender. So not knowing any better, not having gone to the Columbia School of Journalism or graduated from Harvard or Yale, just being a blue-collar kid, I didn't know enough to be intimidated by William Colby. To me, he was just another guy. So I sent him a copy of the Hotel Talk Globe and asked him for an interview. And to my surprise, he called me up one day. I remember my wife answered the phone and she said, "What kind of, Mr. Colby, what do you want?" He said, "Oh, just call me Bill." And he said, "Come on down, I'll give you an interview. I liked your book." And the power of that book, the Hotel Talk Globe, was that it proved to the CIA guy that I knew what it meant to be a soldier. And CIA guys tend to think of themselves as soldiers. The CIA is a very militaristic organization. Most CIA veterans, most CIA officers are military veterans. They do some military service before you go in the CIA. It's set up where if somebody tells you what to do, you salute and you do it. It's not like a touchy-feely kind of a thing. And plus which a lot of them had been in combat. So that book, Hotel Talk Globe, was like an assurance to Colby that I want to understand that aspect of what it means to be a CIA officer. But the other thing is that there was what we call the generation gap at the time. And all these CIA guys that Colby ended up introducing me to were of my father's generation, and many of them had been World War II veterans. And the fact that I had reconciled with my father and that we had bridged that sort of generation gap was another assurance to Colby that I would be able to understand where these guys from the older generation were coming from. So this book, the Hotel Talk Globe, paved the way for me to get into the CIA. And Colby liked it, and he liked the way I told him I was going to go about reviewing the book, researching the program, and he started introducing me to guys who had been very senior officers, not just in the Phoenix program, but in the various programs that Phoenix coordinated. And so, just through my being a guy that came out of left field, blue collar kind of a guy who didn't have all the pretensions and the inside contacts, and I wasn't self-censoring myself the way a guy like Seymour Hersh or Morley Safer or some guy who's been who has editors who are telling him, well, you can do this and you can't do that, or has a publisher who's worried about, has good relations with the CIA and is worried about, getting on the CIA's bad side and losing access. I had none of those problems. It was just me and me alone. And so I got inside and over a period of 4 years, interviewed dozens and dozens of very senior CIA officers. And some of them talked to me about their experiences the same way my father had talked to me. There was something about me and my approach and my speaking with these guys that, one or two of them even told me along the way that they felt that they could talk to me in a way they couldn't talk to their own sons. So, it became a very personal thing, which, of course, after the book came out and they all realized that I wasn't that I wasn't awed by them, or that I wasn't, or that I was going to criticize them. And a lot of them were shocked that I actually quoted them in some of the things that they said to me. A guy who's a graduate of the Columbia School of Journalism knows enough not to quote the personal things that they were telling me. But, it was all on the record. The interviews a lot of the interviews are up on the internet. I recorded them, and a lot of them have been posted on the internet, and anybody can go listen to them. These CIA guys were open with me and forthcoming with me about how the CIA is organized and how it operates in often detail that was in violation of their secrecy oaths as CIA officers, and they did it because Colby had vouched for me, and because a lot of, as I started getting more and more knowledge about the CIA, a lot of them just started thinking I had to be a CIA officer, or else how would I know all this stuff? And I published it all without anybody editing it. There was no published. The publisher sent the manuscript to a Vietnam-War scholar named John Prados. My publisher was William Morrow, and they sent it to Prados. And Prados said, "This is the greatest thing that's ever happened. It tells us how the CIA operated from 1954 to 1969." He said, "But all of a sudden the book ends in 1969. What happened?" And I had sent my manuscript in 2 boxes to the publisher, and they had misplaced the second box. So the publisher wasn't even all that involved in reading and editing the manuscript. They left it up to this guy Prados, and they published the book just the way it was, just the way I sent it to him, without hardly editing a word. So this was not a book about the CIA from somebody but from the New York Times, somebody like Tim Weiner or Seymour Hersh, where they were worried about preserving their context and all that kind of stuff. It was just in a way kind of a raw, unpolished book about the CIA that revealed all sorts of things about the CIA that had never been revealed before. And I found that out because I filed a Privacy Act request with the CIA about any files they were keeping on me while I was writing this book, and it turned out that they had a whole file on me. And the ACLU we actually brought the CIA to federal district court here in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I live, and the federal judge made the CIA turn over most of these documents to me. And in the documents, people were constantly reporting about me and my conversations. And CIA headquarters at one point said he's amassed so much material, classified material on the CIA, it could cause damage to the CIA. They called me Bad News Valentine. I mean, and actually on my website, I published all the CIA's file on me. So all that, not only are the interviews that I had with these CIA guys available on the internet, many of them, the file that the CIA kept on me, I put that up on the internet too. The internet's good for that sort of stuff because nobody else is going to do it. Yeah. And anyway, so I got all these tremendous insights into the CIA, and I'm glad to talk about the details. The details are in the book. The various books, and I wrote my second 2 books after that book about the CIA in Vietnam. I wrote 2 books about how the CIA penetrated and commandeered the various federal drug law enforcement agencies, and how the CIA basically runs the war on drugs. And in this latest book, The CIA as Organized Crime, I talk about how the CIA, and in the Phoenix program in particular, is a model for the Department of Homeland Security, and how the CIA, since 9/11, the CIA's influence here within the United States through the Department of Homeland Security and also through the major media, how the CIA influence isn't restricted to foreign affairs anymore, but with the war on drugs and the implementation of the Department of Homeland based on the Phoenix program model, how the CIA now really controls and controls in a way that corrupts our legislation, legislative affairs, our Congress, our major media, our law enforcement agencies, political and social movements here in the United States, and how the influence of the CIA has just expanded to such an extent that and all the time remaining secret, that it has really become probably the greatest threat to democracy in the United States of America.
Doug, let me ask you a question. You notice how Donald Trump, the great orange leader, right? Donald Trump, we should call him Mr. Trump. How Mr. Trump doesn't take these intelligence briefings. What do you make of that?
Well, that's people ask me about that, and quite frankly, to me, it's not scary or a big deal. I don't think that, for example, Ronald Reagan ever got any intelligence briefings either. And if he did, he certainly didn't understand them or care. He would, he said when you're a chief executive officer, you make policy, and you say to the CIA, if you're the president, do this or do that, and then they come back and they brief members of your staff on the extent to which they're implementing your policies. Now, so I don't. As long as Trump is surrounding himself with people who understand intelligence and can decipher it for him, I would not be concerned about him whether or not he takes intelligence briefings or not. Okay, he's got a staff that's going to do that. The thing that we need to wait and see in order to start judging Trump is who he picks for his national security advisor, and he's nominating a Marine guy named Kelly, and Mike Flynn. And what will Trump and his National Security Council, what policies will they be articulating, and where the CIA will fit into the implementation of those policies? You have to wait for that to see exactly what Trump has up his sleeve. But the thing that we do know, based on is that he wants this guy Flynn to be his national security advisor, and Flynn gives us some clues and his background. And Flynn was it is Flynn, right? Mike Flynn. Getting old. I just want to make sure I got it. Flynn was in the Army, and he was chief of intelligence for the Joint Special Operations Command in Afghanistan and Iraq. He did tours in that position with both of those, with the Joint Special Operations Command. And Flynn himself is an advocate of Phoenix operations, because that's what and I explain it in my book, the way the CIA and special forces are operating in Afghanistan and in Iraq is based also on the Phoenix program model. And Flynn himself, as an intelligence officer, was certainly in a liaison relationship with the CIA. And he was, there's a lot of people out there who pretend to be national security correspondents. And a lot of them on the left seem to think that the military and the CIA are somehow at odds with each other. And that's a great big myth. In countries, in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, the CIA and the military work hand in hand. And especially on these kind of counter-subversion, counterinsurgency operations, which are ongoing in these countries. So Flynn has a very, very close, you can count on it, relationship with the CIA in an operational way. As a guy who was not just aware of CIA policy, but he was working with the CIA stations and members of the CIA station in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he knows these guys, and these guys are, very likely at the very pinnacle of the CIA right now in management positions, and he knows them, and they've worked together. So if Flynn becomes his national security advisor, you can be sure that that Flynn's going to know everything that the CIA is up to and what it's doing, and it'll be an integral part of whatever plans and policies the Trump administration concocts. And the one point of tension might be that the CIA has historically considered Russia its number one enemy. And if Trump is interested in smoothing over relations with Russia, there may be a little bit of institutional friction, because so many of these guys have been fighting the Russians for so long, it's in their blood.
Right.
And I think that would be that might be the big bureaucratic challenge that Trump as president would have, is smoothing over relations with Russia, because there's so many CIA guys who go to bed every night cursing Putin and the Russians and the KGB and its linear descendants and stuff like that. But no, it doesn't bother me that Trump doesn't know anything about the CIA or intelligence. I think he's going to be focusing his efforts on domestic policy anyway.
Now, what about Obama? And a lot of people believe that Obama is a CIA creation. And have you been able to confirm that the first company he went to work for out of college was this World Business United CIA front?
Well, I'm sorry, but I didn't hear everything you said. Are you talking about the guy that he nominated to be head of the CIA?
No, I'm talking about Barack Obama, the president now. Barack Obama, our president. President Obama.
Obama. Yeah. Well, Obama had the fragrance about him of CIA.
Okay.
And I have, I heard and read things about his background that he made him a much more likely person to have CIA contacts than a guy like Trump. But, because Trump, it's hard to see him as in that role. But, and I think that after the Bush administration, which was kind of disgraced by the military invasion and occupation of Iraq, and placing so much influence on the military, that the CIA was glad to work with Obama, and he seemed to give the CIA a free hand to do almost anything it wanted to do. I think that at the same time, the CIA may feel betrayed by Obama in Syria. He did not want to do in Syria what Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld did in Iraq, which was to, shock and awe, just go in and wipe everybody out and take over. Obama said, well, he didn't want to do that, that if we were to, the only way to assure a victory and the overthrow of Assad was to repeat what we had done in Iraq. And quite frankly, the American public wasn't ready for that. And Obama didn't want to lose political support. So he gave the job of subverting Assad to the CIA. And like I told you earlier, the CIA is a military organization. If somebody tells you to do something, you salute and you do it. So the CIA went in and started smuggling guns, forming, revolutionaries into, militias and military outfits and stuff like that. And Obama kind of pulled the plug on them. And now the revolution is, Putin and Assad have pretty much claimed victory, and the insurgents there, which the CIA was almost totally funding and supporting logistically, sometimes through cutouts like Saudi Arabia or Jordan or third countries, just to keep their fingerprints off the operation. So there may have been some feelings of betrayal on the part of the CIA towards Obama at the end, and I think I think that probably accounts for the CIA seemingly being willing to trust Trump and getting behind him, because I don't, they may think that he's less hands-on, or they may sort of feel a little wary about his overtures to Russia. But I think that the CIA was very upset with Obama at the end, and may have helped tilt the election towards Trump by giving Comey, the FBI guy, permission to go ahead and sabotage Hillary in that last week of the election.
Doug, for the audience, can you give them an idea when they see and they hear about Aleppo? Like, what would the CIA's role be in this battle going on in Aleppo, and this withdrawal and all that kind of stuff?
The battle going on where?
Aleppo.
Aleppo. Oh yeah. Well, the CIA based its operations in Aleppo. That's where the core of the insurgency was based. And you have to have a kind of a headquarters, and that's where it was. And that's where they concentrated their efforts, and that's where they made their last stand. But it was strategically well located for resupply, and they thought, the CIA probably thought it was more defensible, and certainly a lot of things that I'm not aware of, in terms of being able to resupply and communications like that. But obviously Aleppo ended up being the headquarters, and I'm sure that the loss of Aleppo is not something that's easy for them to deal with. But and again, Obama is yesterday's news at this point, and he doesn't matter anymore. I don't think that he has any, whatever influence he has over the CIA is probably down to close to nothing.
Yeah, I would agree. But just real quick, again, on Aleppo, when you see this image on TV of this little boy covered in dust in this ambulance, and it's all well lit, and they got this video of this little boy acting all shocked and stuff, what do you make of something like that? Do you think that's staged, or do you think that really happened?
Well, you can't really tell.
Okay.
That's a sign of the times. This is the new, you can talk about lots of different specifics, but the question is, how do you deal with stuff like this, which we see every day on a daily basis? Are the white helmets a CIA front? What's what? Is every NGO, non-governmental organization, a CIA front? Did the CIA stage a coup in Ukraine? There's just a million things that the spectacle of the modern internet and the access to videos on the internet, and everybody having a direct access now, Trump can tweet, and he doesn't have to go through the media anymore, which is huge in terms of him being able to get his message across. All these different things, what you see on the internet, videos of this, video of that. Well, frankly, it can all be faked, and there is no telling anymore whether any particular thing is some sort of genuine article, or whether it's propaganda, or whether it's a deception. And the only way that you can approach these things, unless you're able to get to the original source, which is part of the problem, what's the original source of? The only way you can tell is to be informed, and to have background, and to be able to, in a way, track the historical arc of things that are happening. you have to know, well, what does the CIA do? What's its modus operandi? How does that different from what the special forces do? How is that different than what Homeland Security does? How is that different than what the FBI does? Just in terms of security forces, trying to determine where something might originate. What are their jobs? How are they organized? And then, the same thing, unfortunately, applies to every other facet of society. What kind of, if you watch Fox News simultaneously with MSNBC, you would think you live in two different countries. And yet both of them are claiming to present the facts. And yet news agencies, in the presentation of the facts, can spin them in a million different ways and make you think different things when in fact you're looking at the same event just by the way they report it. And so everybody, what this of course is exacerbating the divides, the social and racial and economic divides in the country, and it doesn't seem to be any way. I mean, again, you can pick a particular video, but it's a much bigger problem in terms of people going to sources of information that have no bearing on what's factual, but simply reaffirm their own assumptions. So everything that's out there and is available, all the facts are out there. They're all available. The problem is that people just keep going to the well with the water that gives them the water they like. Mm-hmm. And they're not taking any time to go around and look at anything that might challenge their own assumptions. And that's the state of paralysis that we're in. And you can see it just by looking at what's going on in Congress. The Republicans and the Democrats are in a permanent state of gridlock. And is that good or is that bad? But there's simply no room for compromise anymore. And there's just been this kind of ideological paralysis that has set in and is plaguing the country and making everybody very upset and very confused.
Yeah, so at 67 years old, you could probably say you've never seen an election cycle like this before.
Yeah, no, we have definitely crossed the Rubicon. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing to say, and although, I'm offended by some of the things that Trump says. He also says he's going to spend billions of dollars on getting jobs in the United States and building up the infrastructure, repairing roads, repairing bridges, trying to get jobs to Americans. He spewed a lot of inflammatory rhetoric during the campaign, but as the campaign went along, he backed off everything. About a month and we learned that the wall was symbolic, was metaphorical. He didn't really mean lock up Hillary. He was just, resorting to hyperbole, and so he's really not going to drain the swamp, as we can see. If anything, he's made the swamp more infectious and more noxious, with it, and he's not even president yet. And nothing's going to change. And so a lot of things that he said are going to change aren't going to change. And even though everybody's at an all-time high with anxiety, I think we have to be patient and we have to, wait and see what he actually, what his national security policy is overseas, what his domestic policies, what he's going to, propose what great legal minds he's going to appoint to the Supreme Court. We got to wait and see how some of these things actually pan out before we panic too much. But certainly the way a president behaves is changed forever. There used to be a expectation that an individual would behave presidentially, and that no longer exists. The example of his tweeting directly is a perfect example of this. There's never been an individual to occupy the White House who was so confident that he just said, I don't need any of you guys writing speeches for me. I'm just going to tweet 140 character, policy proclamations and to hell with everything else. I mean, that's never been done before. This is a whole new way of a president communicating with the public, and whether it's good or whether it's bad or whether it's right or whether it's wrong has yet to be determined, and everybody's just got to go hold tight, not take it too seriously, okay, because there are massive bureaucracies in place. The Pentagon and the military are huge bureaucracy, which their path has been plotted out for the next 20 years. They know where they're going. And, Trump can massage that, but there's not a whole lot he can do to change the overall direction of policies that have been in place for whether it's the military or the CIA or the State Department. He can try to shake those things up, but the experiences of most presidents is that you can move them a little, maybe, but political opposition and the bureaucracies will be like a governor, or I'll break on him to some extent. And like I said, it'll be interesting to see how much he can actually change the direction, and in a very subversive way. I'm rooting for him. We are gridlocked, and maybe it takes a narcissistic, bloated ego like his to actually change the system and open it up and modernize it in ways that we need in the 21st century. But again, who knows? Nowadays you've got to be able to deal with a lot of uncertainty. Okay,
I'd like to bounce around a little bit, okay? Because I got you here. You haven't had you for a long time, and I have some questions from the last show. One is William Colby, the death of William Colby. What do you make of that? A lot of people think it was an assassination.
Well, I think it was poetic. Here you have a guy who was a master spy in World War II. He was with the OSS and he parachuted into German-occupied France, and he worked with groups, the Maquis there, organizing resistance to the Germans. He was in Italy for many years as a CIA officer. He had a family, and he would go around the French countryside, pack his wife and his kids into his car, drive for 4 or 5 hours. The family would go off and look at the ruins in Rome, or go off and look at some historic site, and he would meet with his agents. Secret agents. He was a guy whose whole life was involved in espionage. He went to Vietnam, where he took over the insurgency in Vietnam. Started in 1960. He created its Central Intelligence Organization there, which was the equivalent of our CIA. He created that in South Vietnam. He created and upgraded its special police, which was like an FBI, sort of like an FBI. He was the one who oversaw all of the programs, the evolution of all the programs that the Phoenix program eventually ended up coordinating. He was the guy who oversaw operations against North Vietnam, and one of the things he did was he created a Vietnamese special forces, and he sent like hundreds of South Vietnamese volunteers who parachuted into North Vietnam. Very few people know about it, but they were parachuting into North Vietnam and going on missions like he had done in France in World War II. And many of those soldiers were killed. Almost all the people that the CIA and Colby dropped into North Vietnam were killed on they were what they called one-way missions, and it was and as a result of and then Colby came back to Vietnam in 1969, and he actually took over the Phoenix program and all sorts of programs there that I talk about in my books. So Colby had a lot of enemies, not just in America, but South Vietnamese soldiers, special forces soldiers, who felt that he had betrayed them. And in my imagination, and all I can do is speculate, maybe some of those guys that he had, some of those guys who were really bitter about Colby having sent hundreds of their comrades off to die in North Vietnam on these one-way missions, maybe a couple of those Vietnamese guys, many of whom were like Navy SEALs, maybe some of those guys got together one day and decided that they were going to get back at him. In any event, and the reason I say Colby's death was poetic is because nobody knows. Here was this master spy who one day went down to his little cabin on the Potomac River, I think it was, and had a meal, had a sandwich. He didn't finish it all. Had a glass of wine, didn't finish all the wine. He was there by himself. The wine bottle was on the table. Glass of wine, half empty, sandwich, half eaten, and he decided to get in the canoe and paddle around, and it was nighttime. He decided to do this, just to go off and start paddling around on the Potomac River at night, right after he had eaten half his meal, and he never came home. And, it's such a mysterious death with so many possibilities. The body wasn't found for a couple of days, that it lends itself, it's the perfect death for any kind of master spy to have experienced, and nothing could have been more appropriate. And the fact is that nobody knows what happened. But like I said, my own fantasy about it is that some of these South Vietnamese guys who are mad at the United States for abandoning South Vietnam, and in particular blamed Colby, might have done something. But then again, who knows? It could. The guy had enemies from all sorts of countries and all sorts of places. There were a lot of people in the CIA that hated William Colby. When I was one of the reasons that Colby sent me out and introduced me to a lot of people was at that time he was a controversial figure within the CIA, and a lot of people in the CIA felt that he had let them down because he had revealed what was called the family jewels to Congress and to the Church Committee in 1975. And he had released a lot of this secret information to a guy named Seymour Hersh, and about the CIA, actually, its illegal domestic spying operations through what was called the Chaos Program. And a lot of guys, Colby introduced me primarily to his supporters in the CIA, people who were defending him and his decision to do that. But on my own, I started meeting people who were on the other side of the CIA, which was a very divided organization at the time. And the other half of the CIA were supporters of Richard Helms, who was known as the man who kept the secrets and lied to Congress. Everything he said to Congress was basically a lie. And there were a lot of people that felt that Colby should have done the same thing, not have leaked these family jewels. Colby basically sacrificed Helms. He blamed Helms for the domestic spying operation, and Helms's counterintelligence chief, James Angleton. And those guys, Colby sacrificed them on the altar, basically like fashioned a noose and a scaffold and marched them up and put the noose on their head and hang them in front of the American public. Blame them for all the dastardly things that the CIA had done. And Colby felt that by doing this, he was saving the CIA. Okay? There was so much controversy at the time. And he felt that he had to make some sacrifices, not himself, his competitors. And so the CIA was a very, very divided organization at that time. And a lot of guys who supported Helms, once I located them, were quite willing to be critics of Colby. And a lot of that made it into my book too. And I'm sure that Colby wasn't happy about that. I'm sure part of the wink and a nod agreement that I was supposed to have with him was to present him in nothing but favorable terms. But I was more than happy to give a voice to his critics, who, in terms of things. So it's also possible that some disgruntled CIA guy could have bumped off Colby.
But have you heard any rumors that you would put any weight in?
Pardon me?
Have you heard any rumors that you would put faith in as far as Colby's death? Or it's all just going on your theory?
I'm sorry, I have a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, I know. As far as your theory about Colby's death.
Yes, my theory.
Right, it's just based on your theory, or have you heard any rumors or any kind of inside information?
No, I've discussed it with other people, but, and we've kicked it around. And, but I have no sources.
Okay.
Amongst the South Vietnamese exile community or even, Vietnamese communists, of course, who would have had a big grudge against Colby too. It's not just the South Vietnamese who fought for the CIA and felt betrayed by the CIA, but there was also the North Vietnamese and the Vietnamese insurgents who the Phoenix program targeted. As I think I've explained to you, the Phoenix program went after civilians in South Vietnam, not military people, but the civilian population that supported the guerrillas, and tens of thousands of those people were killed in the Vietnamese through the Phoenix program and CIA police and paramilitary operations. Could be as many as 100,000, although the Congress said 25,000 and other people said 40,000, but there was a whole lot of people in South Vietnam who Colby wiped out. And so, that faction would have, one of them also could have decided, well, it's time for a little payback, Bill. So when I say he had a lot of enemies, you could certainly count them in the millions. It's just too many, and certainly so many people the people who are in the espionage business are all capable of pulling it off. So again, it's uncertain, but my feeling is that if he was murdered, which I don't know to be true, that it probably was as a result of the Phoenix program and CIA operations in Vietnam, one faction or the other.
Now, would it be unusual that he would have no private security around him?
Well, Colby's from the old school. I mean, all of that stuff is overstated, and there's a mystique about the CIA. And if you meet as many CIA officers as I've met, and that mystique vanishes, and you realize that they're people like you and me. I mean, they really are in terms of, I mean, one of them likes spicy Thai food, and, maybe somebody else, he's real Italian, and so he likes Italian food. I mean, they all have individual the traits and characteristics, and, I mean, they're all avid anti-communists. I mean, they all hate communism, and they have an ideology. But a lot of these guys are they like to cause trouble. And one of the things about CIA guys is, like they don't want to show fear, and it's kind of a ethic amongst them that you don't show fear. And the whole idea of having a bodyguard or something like that would be undignified to a lot of these guys. I don't know what they, I think that if you're actually in the CIA and you're running the station in Kiev in the Ukraine, and you're undercover and you're involved, there's Russian spies looking for you and people that are out to get you, well, then maybe you have a bodyguard. But in private life, after you're retired, I mean, these are guys that go to the country club and they play golf, and they meet their buddies, and their buddy's a doctor or maybe he's a dentist or they like to. There was a bunch of CIA guys that I got involved with, Lucien Conin and Joe Baker and Sam Draculic and a guy named Talia Kampora. And every morning they met at the local McDonald's. I mean, and they just got together and had a coffee. I mean, if the Russians had wanted to get them, I mean, these are feeble old guys, too. They had strokes, they're dragging their legs around behind them. They can't see anymore. It just isn't that way in real life that somebody like Colby would have a bodyguard. It just, at least, certainly wasn't 20 years ago. I don't know, maybe things have changed, but I don't think so. That was probably a lot longer answer than you were.
No. Your answers are great. Thank you very much. And
but it's just when you leave the CIA and you're retired, it's just not the same thing. I mean, even for these retired guys, the steel wall comes down. I mean, they can't. They can't then just on a whim go back to Langley headquarters and walk in. I mean, they're gone. They're out. They're not part of it anymore. What they have is their memories and a lot of these guys, most of the people I talked to were retired. Let's make that clear. I was not talking. There might have been a few who were active duty. But most of these guys were retired and older guys. I got, they certainly still had their connections. I interviewed one guy named Bob.While, who had been very integral in the Phoenix program. And I interviewed him late in my research, probably around 1987. And he was living in Rockville, Maryland. And he had a little split-level house, and just like anybody else on the block. And he told me all about his experiences as a CIA officer and the role that he played in the Phoenix program and operations in Vietnam. And we went out to lunch and had lunch together and came back, finished up the conversation. And as I was leaving, we walked down through his basement and out his garage door into his driveway. Because like I said, it's a split level. And my car was parked down below, and we were standing there in the, halfway in and out of his garage. And he said, so Doug, we've been talking, all of us. We know what you're doing. We know how much information you've gathered about the CIA and the Phoenix program. And I just want you to know that I run a youth leadership program for the CIA. And we think you're the kind of guy that would be perfect to become part of this program. And if you let us review your manuscript and make the changes to it that we need to make, we'll get you a job on the Senate Armed Service Committee as a research staffer. And your starting salary will be about $80,000 a year. So they have that, they're out of the CIA, but they still, some of them are more connected than others, and they wanted me to go to work for them and turn my book over to them. And I said, well, thanks very much, Bob, but I like to work for myself. I couldn't work on a Senate staff because I don't take direction very well, and it's just not a good fit for me. Thanks, but no thanks. And when I got home, my wife and my father were both very upset that I didn't take an $80,000 a year job, because that was an awful lot of money back then. But other guys get out of the CIA, and I want nothing to do with it. They never want to see another CIA officer again. Or, they look forward to just sailing their boat or fishing or something else. It's not like you see on the movies and TV where headquarters is calling these guys up and saying, you got to come back to work for us. It's not that way.
Right.
So they're out of their door and they get kicked in the butt and given a watch, and that's it. Just like any other job.
Now, that brings up a good question. Because, my show is heard on a lot of these alternative media type stations. And a lot of the listeners will listen to this show, but they'll also listen to some of these other kind of shows that have some really wild stuff, man. Like talking about the CIA agents involved in underground bases and time travel and jump rooms to Mars and really, double. Okay, what do you make of all that stuff?
It's like with Colby and his death. And here again, just to get back to this idea of corruption and how the CIA is corrupting everything. When you have an organization with as much power of the CIA and it operates in secret, anybody can project. You know what projection is, right? You can project anything you want onto that blank slate. And you can make up any kind of BS that you want. And this is, one of the problems is because in reporting about the CIA, and what we know about the CIA comes from national security correspondents, people who are at the highest level of the major media. The major media, you're alternative, but the major media is owned by about 6 corporations. It's very, very closed. It's a closed shop, to use a labor term. And in order to become a national security correspondent and report on the CIA, you have to pretty much belong to one of these 6 corporate conglomerates, which have been involved with the CIA for 70 years. And you have to have gone to one of the schools, the Columbia or Harvard or Yale, which actually produces CIA officers. The same schools, the same academies, the same corporations that produce CIA officers produce the national security correspondents that cover the CIA. I mean, these guys are joined at the hip. And the only way you ever get to cover the CIA is if you go through the same, get to sort of almost the same security clearances. You have to have the same exact ideology. You have to. You become part of a media which is organized the same way the CIA is, militarily, where your editor tells you something and you salute and you do it. And they say, okay, we have a long-term contact at Langley, and that Langley wants to make a statement about what's going on in Syria. So you. Let's say Mark Mazzetti from the New York Times, was a national security correspondent there. I want you to go over to Langley or get on the phone and talk to this guy, and he's going to tell you what to say. And then you come back here and you give this report on the CIA. And that's how it works. I mean, these people are working together to protect the secrets of the CIA and not reveal anything. And so everything that you know about the CIA is a lie. because the CIA is feeding these national security correspondents with the plausibly deniable story, which then, because they want to maintain their connections with the CIA, and the CIA won't talk. The minute you veer off the script that the CIA has prepared for you, you're gone. You're never going to be there anymore. And the editors and the publishers aren't going to let this happen, because the managers, the people in executive management at the CIA, are having lunch with the publisher of the New York Times, the top editors of the Washington Post, and off the record, they're telling these guys what goes on. And they're part of the secret. And they know that 6 months from now, we're going to have a coup in the Philippines. But because they're, quote, patriots, they're not going to tell this, and they won't even let their correspondents know all this stuff. So the CIA is not only corrupting, and the CIA has the same relationship with members of Congress and the staffers at the Congress. Yeah, I mean, you do realize that they wanted to put me in as a staff aide to the Armed Services Committee, where I would be cultivated over the years, and I would be able to conduct CIA business on that committee, and I would have a clearance, and I would be able to see things that the congressman wouldn't be able to see, and I'd be able to lie to the congressman and manipulate the congressman, because the CIA, I was working basically for the CIA. Well, it's the same thing in Congress in terms of intelligence and espionage issues that regard to the CIA. It's the same thing it is in the national media. These people are all part of the same club. They have the same objectives. They have the same, and they're covering for each other, because they're all making fabulous fortunes and living very happy, successful lives because they cover for each other. And it's corrupt, and it's anti-democratic, and it's destroying this country from within. And ever since 9/11 and the creation of the Homeland Security apparatus, it's just become a monster that's feeding off us. And we've become like the South Vietnamese. I mean, we're just, guys on the assembly line. They're Henry Ford, and we're workers on the assembly line to them. And it doesn't, it doesn't matter what we do or what we think or what we feel. They're just feeding us the BS line. All of them together, the Congress, the CIA, the media, because they've run it and they've consolidated all their power, and they can do it. And they're doing it, which again is why it'd be interesting to see what Trump, what kind of havoc he can reach on this system. Because, even though he seems like a loose cannon, maybe he'll punch a couple of holes into this thing, inadvertently or advertently, but, the ship, somebody needs to sink this ship, or at least poke some holes in it so we can get some fresh air into it, and maybe in some small way start claiming the democracy back. Other than being able to watch football games on Sunday, there's a lot of, having a high DTV, there's a lot of people that are hurting in the country. And there's so much phenomenal wealth out there that they don't have to be hurting out there. And they don't have to be without health care. And they don't have to they shouldn't have to pay $100,000 to send their kid to college for 4 years so that the kid can have a middle-class life. These things are not necessary. They're obstacles that are put up in order to keep power in a few people's hands. And that's the state that we're in today.
You gave a great example in your Counterpunch article that you just sent me about how morally safer did a hatchet job on your book.
Yeah, and I didn't even know I knew after I wrote that Phoenix Program book, I knew the CIA was keeping a file on me. I knew they were going to be mad. I actually thought at the time that would be the last book I ever wrote. And I was told by a lot of people, this is the last book you're ever going to write. You're never going to get another book published in the United States because you're telling all their secrets and you're quoting them personally about personal things, which I can't emphasize enough, is a rule that it's one of the rules that a national security correspondent on the inside would never break. You're not allowed to humanize these guys and talk about them that way. So I knew I was going to be in trouble. And when Morley reviews came out, Safer's review came out in the New York Times, although I was expecting it, it hurt. And, when it happens, it happens. Even though you're expecting it, it's still, I guess I was kind of hoping that people and it's certainly true that I was hoping that people on the left in the United States, the anti-war movement, would rally behind me. And but that never happened either, and I explain why that never happened in the book too. But it wasn't. That happened. The review happened in 1990, and it wasn't until 25 years later that I found out that Morley Safer actually had a personal relationship with William Colby. That Colby during the Vietnam War, had called up Morley Safer one day and said to him, "Hey, can you disappear for 3 days?" And Safer said, "Sure," And Colby then took Safer around to every CIA base, basically every province. He introduced, for a couple of days, he introduced Safer to the guys who ran the counter-terror teams. He introduced Safer to the guys that ran the interrogation centers. He showed them how the CIA set up and ran covert operations to manipulate social and political movements. He opened all the books to Morley Safer and gave Safer an inside view of the CIA that very few people ever get. And this is like, I'm telling you, when it came time to kill my book, it was no mistake that Bill Colby and the Washington and the New York Times chose Morley Safer, because Colby had inducted Safer into this private club when he did that. And Safer had sold his soul and had joined the club and had become one of their, in exchange for a successful career and becoming a pundit and a talking head and being assured for the rest of his life. He was known that he would cover for the CIA and protect all its secrets. And also it was like Don Corleone in The Godfather, going to that funeral director and saying, the time for you, remember I told you, someday I'm going to ask you to do a favor for me, and now you're going to do the favor. I want you to kill Doug Valentine's book, and Safer said, "Okay, Godfather, I'll do it. And that's how it works. That's why I was wondering at the time, well, why Morley Safer? It took me 25 years to figure it out, to find out, when Safer let it slip inadvertently at some conference that he was at, well, I owed Colby this big favor, he let me in. Mm. So you never, I always assumed there was something like that had gone on between Safer and Colby. But, it took me 25 years to actually see the documented evidence. And let me just stress to your listeners, that's how it works, folks. This is going on every day in 1,000 different ways. And it's not, the CIA just doesn't have its hooks into national security correspondents like Safer and congressmen. It has its hooks into businessmen and the guys who run telecommunications companies and the guys who run Google and Yahoo and every business around the world and half the businesses here in the United States. I actually explain how some of that works. I actually explain how a lot of that works in this book, The CIA as Organized Crime, and having been victimized by it myself, having had my First Amendment rights destroyed by the CIA, having had my career basically destroyed by the CIA for doing nothing more than telling the truth about how the CIA works. I'm telling you by experience, that's how it works.
How about now, with the second book coming out? Now that the second book has come out, are you experiencing any kind of harassment or any kind of problems now?
Apart from, one of my publisher's website was hacked. One of the people that did a review for me, one of the alternative media places that wrote a review about this book, they were hacked and went offline for a day. The day the review went up. Hacking seems to be the harassment of choice nowadays. Nobody's like throwing bricks through my windows, but I can't get a review in any major publication, even the major. And again, this is something that I talk about in this book. Even the anti-war people and the anti-CIA people are so intimidated, none of them will come to my, aid. I can't, like The Nation or Mother Jones or the people that the news outlets that pretend to represent the anti-war movement or the left. They avoid me like the plague too, because they have the same relationships at a particular level with the CIA, and they don't want to get them bad with the CIA either. So apart from the fact that I've been relegated to the margins,
the Opperman report.
That nobody is going to help me out, the way a lot of writers get helped out. Apart from, having to have, and again, I'm not really complaining, because there's always strings attached with that kind of help. And I never wanted to, to have to compromise myself. But, I'm comfortable in my role as a pretty much just a nobody, or somebody who's not going to be with a major publisher or a major news outlet, simply because I'm a heretic.
Mm. Back to the
one more question, and then I'm done.
Oh, I knew it. Yeah, we did go over time. I appreciate you giving me some extra time. I was going to try and squeeze as much out of you as I could. Some of the characters that come out of the Phoenix program, okay, are pretty extreme. A guy like Colonel Michael Aquino, and also too, then you hear about John DeCamp. And these are probably the two biggest questions I get about our last show that we did together, about Colonel Michael Aquino and John DeCamp. A lot of people suspect that John DeCamp was maybe like a gatekeeper in his investigations into the Franklin cover-up and that kind of stuff. What do you make of that kind of stuff?
John McCain?
No, John DeCamp. He was like...
Oh, John DeCamp. Yeah, well, I was in touch with him briefly at one point. And I think he said to me at the time that he had been on Colby's staff in South Vietnam, and that he knew certain and particular things about Colby. And I listened to him. He didn't have anything to say to me that was new or that I thought merited inclusion in my book or any articles I wrote. And then a couple of years later, I saw that he had done the Franklin thing, right? And I looked at some of that, and it wasn't an area that I was particularly interested in. So I wasn't. I really don't know all that much about it. I never read the Franklin book. I looked at it.
Okay.
But, I don't know I don't know that DeCamp actually worked for Colby or was in Phoenix. I never went to try to verify that. And I really don't know whether the things that he said in the book about Franklin were true or false, or I never double-checked or researched the accuracy of what he was doing. So unfortunately, I just don't have enough knowledge about all that stuff other than knowing that it exists and basically who he is. I just don't know. Can't really make any judgments about it. I went in different directions with my research.
Then what about the other one I mentioned, Colonel Michael Aquino, who was the head of the Temple of Set, the satanic cult, and he was involved in the Phoenix program, correct?
What was the name?
Colonel Michael Aquino.
Yeah, I've heard about him too, but it's the same thing for him as with the camp. I just don't know. I've read his wiki bio. People have asked me about him, but I never talked to him. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I can't confirm or deny. I just don't know anything about the guy, my interests went in other directions.
Yeah, don't worry. You're never disappointing. You're never disappointing. You're a great guest, and I really appreciate you coming on the show again for me. One last question, and it's in this same category, because we have all this stuff about the CIA being involved in drugs and other crimes, extortion. What about child trafficking? And did you run across any kind of indication of child trafficking, human trafficking by the CIA?
Drug trafficking?
Child trafficking, human trafficking.
Trafficking. Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I focused on arms and especially drugs. And everybody in the world knows that the CIA is up to its eyeballs in the drug trade and the arms trade. I mean, and those two things go hand in hand. The CIA is also involved in every other kind of criminal enterprise. And the underworld is a place where the CIA feels perfectly at home, and it cultivates contacts and assets in every kind of criminal organization. And criminal organizations that are involved in drugs and arms, some of them tend to be involved in child trafficking and sex trafficking as well. Certainly here in the United States, mafia organizations that are involved in drugs are also involved in pornography. They're also involved in strip clubs, escort services, and for rich people. And I'm not accusing Donald Trump of being one of these people. He obviously has his own sources, largely in Czechoslovakia, as I understand. but a lot of rich people who've got a lot of money and have are able to indulge their perversions in ways that poor people can't, have connections with the underworld in order to have children, sex with children. And it's basically something that involves the upper classes who have enough money to afford these kind of guilty pleasures, illegal pleasures. And if it was to the CIA's advantage to blackmail foreign politicians or politicians here in the United States or corporate executives or other rich people, wealthy people who are in positions of power by actually filming them with young girls or young boys, they would do it in a second and feel no more moral compunctions about it at all. So do I actually have any evidence that the CIA does it? No. Can I tell you in good conscience with 100% certainty that it would do it if it had the opportunity and if it served, quote, the national security interests of the United States? Yeah, they would in a heartbeat. But I personally have not investigated that. But the question has intrigued me, and frankly, I had never thought about it never really, unfortunately, had thought about it. I had heard about the CIA doing that in Vietnam. That there was a very famous hotel in the middle of Saigon, the Continental Hotel, which was owned by a French Corsican guy named Francisi, who was involved in all sorts of rackets. The French controlled the rackets in Vietnam, even after the American invasion. And this guy Francisi owned the Continental Hotel, and I was told by people involved in espionage that every one of those rooms was bugged. at the Continental Hotel. And that when visiting diplomats came to Saigon and they stayed there, that, some of these visiting diplomats were from the, Congress, or maybe they were from Shell Oil, and they were looking for, to get a contract there. People would come up to them and say, in Saigon, we don't have the same morality that we have back in the United States. Having sex with underage girls here isn't considered bad. And if you want a young boy or a young girl, we can arrange that for you. I had one CIA officer tell me that every night his Vietnamese subordinates brought him a different young girl, every night that he was there, 14, 15-year-old girl. So these things happen. And I know for a fact that they happen. And I know that the CIA would use those methods to blackmail people in the Vietnam War. I mean, I know this because I've been told it, and it makes sense, and a lot of people told it to me. I don't actually have the, documentary evidence, but that's how the spy business works. That's how the spy business has always worked. That's part of the allure of being in the spy business, is you get to taste forbidden pleasures. And if they were going to do it in Saigon, well, you can be damn sure they would do it in Dallas. Mm. So it's not beyond it's not at all a leap of imagination to think that they would do that.
Doug,
it makes perfect sense.
With this gift, this talent you have as a storyteller, have you ever considered doing a podcast of your own?
Doing what?
A podcast, doing your own podcast, a 1-hour show every week.
Nah.
Why not?
No, I'm just. I appreciate the opportunity to exercise my storytelling talents, but I have no interest in doing it on a routine basis.
I'm gonna email you. I'm gonna nag you about that. Okay.
Thanks for having me on the show, and just let everybody know I have a website, DouglasValentine.com. Okay.
And when I get off, I'm going to plug you for galore, so don't worry. Doug, thank you so much, okay?
It's always a pleasure to be with you, and take care.
It really is. Thank you very much. Then we got Doug Valentine. I can't thank him enough for coming on the show. It's a little difficult because he has 2 hearing aids, and I got to kind of stick my face right into the camera when we talk and ask him questions. But Doug Valentine, you can go to his website, DouglasValentine.com. Okay? That's one thing. The 2 books, one is called The Phoenix Program. And this is this is a valuable book, like he describes. No one was talking about this before Douglas Valentine came out with that book, The Phoenix Program, and it's very well documented. And all the audio recordings from the interviews you can find on his website, DouglasValentine.com. I did another 2-hour interview with Doug about 2 years ago. That's in the members section at OppermanReport.com. Okay, and everyone they think this is one of the best interviews that's ever been on this show. So you could find that if you sign up and become a member or you could even buy it, a single version of it for $2 over at OppermanReport.com in the special archives section. The book he just came out with right now, and we didn't really touch on it as much as I hoped we would. There's just so many topics to discuss with Douglas Valentine. Is the CIA as organized crime: how illegal operations corrupt America and the world. I'm going to be back with a couple more words after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Did you know that 30% of all people on online dating websites and personal ads are either married or in a monogamous relationship? 30%. If you suspect that your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend may be cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com. Our online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we could trace it back to online personal ads, dating sites, and social networks. We can even expand the investigation and find them cheating on escort service sites, or even porn sites if they're registered to porn sites and swinger sites. So check out emailrevealer.com if you suspect your spouse is cheating, and check out our online infidelity investigation. William Ramsey is a producer here at the Opperman Report, and he's just come out with a new book, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. Now, he just sent me a copy of this book. Oh boy, it's about 2 inches thick, and there's a chapter on just about everybody in this book that you can imagine. The Beatles and Jack Parsons, everybody's in here. It's incredible. And I definitely recommend this book. There's a bunch of pictures in here, too, of all these people and different chapters and information. Anton LaVey and people I've never heard of, too. There's a whole bunch in here. JFC Fuller. I don't know who he is. But it's great stuff by our producer here, William Ramsey. So check out Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. You can find it on Amazon.com.